Hello, my name is Ashley Nyhan, and today I'm going to be talking about the biblical story of Noah's Ark and its relation to historical facts and figures. Before we begin the presentation, I'm going to take you through the different things that I will be talking about. First and foremost, I'm going to introduce you to the topic at hand, which is Noah's Ark. Then I will explain my methodology behind this research, followed by an explanation of major findings. Finally, we will have a discussion of those findings and end by describing points of future research. The introduction to this presentation answers the question, what is the point? One of the most widely asked questions of the Bible is if it is made up of stories or made up of historical events. To answer this question, as a part of the Christian faith, it is believed that every word of the Bible speaks truth, is God-breathed and inspired, and is based off of events that are historically accurate and true. The purpose of this presentation is to show and prove the historical accuracy of the story of Noah's Ark, found in Genesis chapters 6 through 9 of the Bible, by tying it directly to geographical, archaeological, and geological discoveries of today. The methodology section answers the question what and why. The first step in my methodology was to read and study the text. In order to gain a more well-rounded understanding of the passage of interest, it was important to read and study with different contexts. For this reason, the story of Noah's Ark was read twice, once using the New International Version, otherwise known as NIV, and a second time using the English Standard Version, ESV. This can help to establish differences in translation and give readers a fuller understanding of the story, which in this case is about how the devotion and faithfulness of one man to God in the midst of sinful and rebellious worlds resulted in the sparing of his life. The second step is to find details within the passages that could possibly link to scientific or historical discoveries in order to prove that the biblical story of Noah's Ark is in fact accurate. It is vital to start in the Bible by taking points and ideas found within it and use them to start researching. Some of these points include cypress wood, the main material used for the ark. Where was cypress wood found, and were there any found remnants of the wood in places not native to the tree? Secondly, the biblical text mentions flooding along with earthquakes. Could this have anything to do with the separation of land from Pangaea to what we now know as the different continents today? Last, are there any fossils found that could point to the flood? The third step was to do some general online research about Noah's Ark and its historical accuracy to see what I could find, because it is very helpful when researching to first look through a wider lens so as to not miss any important details. After looking at the story and researching some general topics about it, then the details and more specific facts can and should be researched. Using the very non-specific search, proof of Noah's Ark being true, many news articles came up describing many discoveries that have taken place over the years since the time of the flood, including findings of a civilization in the Black Sea that dated near the time of the flood, the idea that the story of Noah is very similar to an ancient Mesopotamian tale, and finally how the presence of ice and glaciers during those biblical times might have played a role in the flood. Finally, the last step was to conduct a more in-depth research on some of the more interesting topics found within preliminary research. These chosen topics were the idea of melting ice glaciers, Pangaea, and the existence of fossils dating back to the time of the flood. The next section is major findings, and it answers the questions what stood out and why. Genesis 7:11, when describing the story of the flood, states that, quote, springs of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of the heavens were opened. And reading the story of Noah, sometimes it is overlooked that water came not only from the sky, but from land itself, and one of those sources might have been through glaciers. It has been scientifically suggested that during the time of Noah, the earth looked much different than it did today, and it has been proven that land was very much covered in ice and filled with many glaciers. Going back in time to when Noah was in the process of building the ark, it is known that at the time there was a drought. Two geologists at Columbia University's Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory have suggested that this drought had to do with the melting and retreating of glaciers, depriving the area where Noah lived of water. This melting of glaciers further caused the ocean to rise, making the area in which Noah lived like an ocean basin. This rise in ocean water eventually led to massive overflow and intense flooding in a manner that had the potential to destroy humanity, relating back to the original idea that waters not only came from the skies, but from the earth. Pangaea, the one singular piece of land that was on Earth, which split apart due to plate tectonics in ancient history, is another piece of evidence that might be lightly tied to the occurrence of Noah's Ark. When God created land in Genesis 1:9, he said, quote, "Let the waters under the heavens be gathered together in one place, and let dry land appear," giving the idea that there was only one piece of land created at the time. Later, following the flood in Genesis 10:25, a man by the name of Peleg, meaning earthquake, was mentioned. It is stated that he was named this because, quote, "in his time the earth was divided." Although this is not solid evidence of the existence of Pangaea or the idea that the earth was separated during the time of the flood and the earthquakes that followed, it can be argued that there are connections between the idea of Pangaea and the story of Noah's Ark. The Institution for Creation Research has conducted much research about the fossils, specifically those created by rapid burial, which is a type of fossilization that occurs so quickly much of the organism is preserved. Most fossils found today were formed by rapid burial, requiring a specific set of circumstances to occur in order to form. Moreover, quote, most fossils occur in huge fossil graveyards, where things from different habitats are mixed together in a watery grave. In fact, many of the events leading up to the creation of a fossil can be dated back to the necessity for an event of rare and catastrophic nature to account for the preservation of that organism, an idea that points directly to the occurrence of the flood in Noah's Ark. The next section is discussion and answers the question, so what? Over the years, there have been many individuals who claim to have found Noah's Ark, something that would prove the truth of the story once and for all. But this raises the question as to why it hasn't been found, or who has prevented it from being found. Although there is some general evidence that a flood occurred at some point in the history of the world, there's been no rock-solid proof, leaving people the opportunity to point towards other things instead of God. Like in many other situations in life, scientists depend only on physical facts and artifacts to prove the truth and validity of a story, placing no reliance on faith that it happened. The reality is, at some point, it is a matter of an individual having faith in a God who lives by his word. If God wanted the Ark of Noah to be found, if he wanted geological evidence to be discovered, leaving humans the inability to doubt him, then it would happen. The lack of this evidence shows his want for us to trust and have faith in him. Although there is no evidence that points against the occurrence of a flood, the lack of solid evidence pointing towards it results in scientists and individuals who refuse to believe the Bible is anything more than stories for entertainment to deny any potential tie from the Bible to modern-day discoveries. The final section of this presentation is future research and asks the question, what now? Some topics and ideas for future research within this topic include looking for specific remnants that have been found dating back to the time of Noah's Ark, and conducting research on conflicting ideas that may prove to be of benefit. In gathering an understanding of why others do not believe the story of Noah's Ark, it is possible to strengthen the argument that it is true by finding new and improved ways to defend it. Finally, it might be necessary for individuals to conduct more research and go more in depth within the topic of ice glaciers and their relation to biblical times, as it is a very large topic and hard to be covered in one singular presentation. Thank you so much for listening and have a great night.